Some things never change. Like my appreciation of this very cheaply made but excellently flavored Neumarkt. This 70 cent a bottle, excellently bitter, very manly, very fresh tasting beer. Really great at that. But some things do change. And they change in quite significant and unexpected ways. And this is what we're talking about today. This video is about a change of heart. This video is about eating my own words. This video is also about demystifying old concepts and beliefs. This video is also about defetishizing things and objects. This video is where I yet again give up vintage lenses in favor of modern, autofocus, contemporary lenses. So let's talk about it. So then, what's all this about? Because I've gone on record recently saying how I was oh so wrong by trying autofocus, how much a vintage lens on a full-frame body suits exactly what I see in my head, and how that's the perfect tool combo for me to achieve the look I'm after in photography. How I was the wide open all the way, all the time kind of guy. And all these are things I'm taking back right now, because I'm selling everything I own as far as vintage lenses go. I'm only keeping the body, the Sony A7R III. I've since bought a Sony G40mm f2.5 and have the intention to buy several more modern, soulless, characterless, sterile, stupidly sharp autofocus lenses. So in this video I'm going to tell you why I'm giving up on vintage lenses. Well, firstly, it's got to do with the fact that I don't necessarily own enough money in order to maintain both the vintage lens film camera kit for the fun of it, and also invest into buying at least a few autofocus lenses. I have to sell something in order to buy something else. So that's why the vintage lenses have got to go. Well, not more than a couple of months ago, I made videos about how great vintage lenses are, how excellent is manual focusing. And while I am walking it all back, kind of decidedly, I do still want to admit that vintage lenses have a certain kind of look that I find that is charming. And that is the compromise I'm making. I've been doing photography with a semi-serious intent since 2016. However, I kept it in a state where it was more so than not just play. It was a hobby I maintained for relaxation, for clearing my mind after a hard day at work, after just basically life. And it was where I went to just have a couple of beers, walk a couple miles and take a couple of pictures. It was like some people go fishing. I went out and took photos. Sure enough, I tried my best to make good photos, but still it was just a hobby, a playful endeavor. And this allowed me to make the compromise of not being able to capture the fleeting, transitory, decisive moment. Manually focusing, and especially seeing how I was dead set and stubbornly just basically always shooting wide open, meant that I have eventually began recognizing situations and shots that were maybe just too hectic, too unpredictable, too dynamic, too fast for me to manually focus. And I was fetishizing shooting wide open all the time in such a way that shooting at f8 or even slightly stopped down felt like something that was beneath me. I was getting a sense of pride, and this is a recurring theme, and I'll talk about this more later. I had become quite proud of being able to manually focus on the streets. So this was like a badge of honor for me. It felt like something that differentiated me from all those other photographers that I secretly and shamefully, I must admit, looked down on, that used autofocus. I saw myself as, well, not as far as my results go, but as far as my technique, I saw myself as better than them. While not having a lot to show for, I did have this, the ability to manually focus wide open on the street. And I had become quite good at it, sufficiently good that I missed very rarely. I had a lot of keepers as far as getting pictures in focus, not that they were really good pictures. So this has become quite like a badge of honor to me. And I began fetishizing shooting wide open. I began fetishizing shooting vintage lenses, which was yet another thing that I felt like it set me apart from the mass. You see, I also kind of had this desire to feel different. I have this, much less so now, but I had this desire to feel different and special. So I had these two things, vintage lenses and shooting wide open. Another thing that kind of starts to move in a direction I had not anticipated is the fact that I'm beginning to consider zoom lenses. For the longest time, for years and years and years, I was a very, very staunch and steadfast proponent of primes. While I still am of the opinion that generally primes are better than zooms, all other things being equal, I have managed to be able to compromise this little image quality in favor of ease of use, practicality, and basically just making my life easier and allowing me to get to that elusive, decisive moment. Because this very decisive moment was what I was compromising when I was treating photography like play, when I was taking my time with manually focusing my vintage lenses on the streets. So when and how did this all happen? About a month ago, I went to a 6-day photography workshop organized by Alexandru Ilea. I'm going to be hopefully not forgetting to link his Instagram down below, and Horea Preja as well. These two guys organized a photography workshop at a monastery about 300 kilometers, I think it's down that way. For what it's worth, it's the 15th edition. This happens yearly. It used to happen twice yearly. So I went there together with a handful of, not even a dozen other people, to participate in a photography workshop at an Orthodox monastery. Now, this is quite a fortunate alignment of planets, let's call it, because it's the first proper workshop I attended, and it's a 6-day workshop, and it was free. Usually, 2-day weekend workshops cost upwards of hundreds of euros. This was a 6-day photography workshop, and it was free. The only thing participants had to pay for was basically the way there, because food and lodgings were taken care for by the monastery. That in and of itself is quite something. Also, shooting photography in a monastery is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And now I think it's self-explanatory that life in a monastery is not like life out there. They have their own rules. While on the street, I just can shoot anything I want as long as I'm doing it in public space. A monastery is somebody's home. It's private property. Monks actually live there, so they allow us to be there. So we have to follow the rule of the land, let's call it. And you can't just walk into a monastery and start taking pictures. It's frowned upon, and you will undoubtedly upset people there. So the fact that this was specifically organized by and in the monastery meant that we were not only allowed, but everything and everyone there was just so gracious with us and really patient. We could work the scene like crazy. And when I go out and take photos on the street, I can't realistically work the scene for 20 minutes, because by the time a minute passes, the scene will have changed significantly. People don't really allow you to be all up in their faces and take photos and try various angles. And this is all something that we were able to do there. Now, at the same time, at the monastery, there was a summer work camp. For those of you unfamiliar with Orthodox monastery life, I need to explain a few terms, especially and maybe specifically the term of obedience. Everybody that lives, even if just for a short while in a monastery, is assigned what they call obediences. These are chores, these are tasks that you basically have to do. Now, realistically, there's no penalty if you don't do them, but the kind of people that do go to a monastery go there in order to do these kind of chores. Even the head monk of the monastery has his own obediences assigned to him by the higher-ups. So everybody in the monastery does something, be it work in the kitchen, be it cooking, be it cleaning or washing the dishes or doing the laundry or tending to things that needs to be taken care of in the monastery. Because this monastery, I want you to imagine quite a significant area of land where they have garages, where they fix their cars, they have sheep, they have pigs, and not 2 or 3, they have dozens of sheep and dozens of pigs. They have vineyards, they have orchards, they have gardens, they have painting workshops where they paint icons and do also all sorts of Christian Orthodox paraphernalia. So there's a lot of work in a monastery. And I mentioned the fact that at the same time that this photography workshop of ours was going on, there was also a youth work camp going on, where about 40 or so students came there to live and work and do these obediences. It was basically our subject matter, a bit on the schedule there, because it's worthwhile getting at least an approximate idea of the atmosphere there. We generally woke up at 5:30 in the morning to get ready for the Divine Liturgy, which started at 6. And this was for the weakest among us. The strongest among us would go to what they called, I'm not sure what the English term is, but it's a sermon that starts at 3 a.m. in the morning. So the weakest of us woke up at 5:30 in the morning to go to the Divine Liturgy, which started at 6, ended at 8, when we went to have breakfast. Then the youngsters, the students, would start work on their obediences. And it's basically why and how and where I started seeing how treating photography in a more serious manner. During this workshop, our main concern, practically our only concern, was photography. And it was the very first time when I treated photography like I imagine I would if it were a job, if I were a reporter or a journalist or working on a documentary project. We would, as I said, wake up, go to the Divine Liturgy, eat our breakfast, go out and take pictures until about 1 o'clock at noon when we would have lunch, then go back taking pictures until about 6 in the p.m. when we would have to make a selection of our images from throughout the day. Images we would proceed to discuss each evening when we would all gather around our workshop teachers and they would take a look at our pictures and give us feedback. And treating photography in such a serious manner, like it was an actual full-time job and endeavor, allowed me to realize that I had been doing it all wrong. Well, not really wrong, but almost, yeah, I dare say I was doing it without the seriousness that it requires. Because, as stated earlier, I compromised on being able to capture the decisive moment oftentimes, and I had begun recognizing certain scenes and situations where I wouldn't even bother trying to photograph them because I knew it was something I wouldn't be able to take. And I thought this was all right. And I thought this was a compromise worth doing because it was all for the experience. While I still have quite a lot of love for photography, I see it in a much less romantic way. I see it as a professional, serious endeavor which requires you to use the best tools available for you. I used to think that if Bresson was able to do street photography with a manual focus lens, why shouldn't I? I failed to realize, and I do now, was the fact that Bresson was using the best tools available to him at the time. I am 100% confident, were it the case, Bresson would be using autofocus lenses. If he lived now, he wouldn't be using manual focus lenses for the experience of it, for the je ne sais quoi of it. He would be using the best, fastest, most precise tools he could possibly get. And sure enough, these tools are sometimes soulless, especially compared to vintage lenses. Their sharpness sometimes is just a bit too much. Sure enough, they're a bit sterile and somewhat digital in the way they render images. They lack the soft, elegant shine, the halation of vintage lenses, but what they do offer is fast, precise, good autofocus. And during these 6 days at the workshop, I noticed on quite a few occasions that I was missing shots. I was missing shots because I was manually focusing. And while on the one hand I was able to linger around and work the scene a lot because we were allowed to be there, on the other hand I was missing moments because I was not focusing quickly enough. And yet another thing that was defetishized is the shoot wide open all the time. By the third day, began realizing the fact that I was missing shots, and maybe perhaps it was when I started thinking about maybe possibly getting an autofocus lens in the future, is when I transitioned to shooting a bit top down. I put my lens at f2.8, then at f4, and I noticed that it's not all bad. It allowed me to get sharper pictures with more in focus, and I was better suited and more ready to capture scenes I wasn't able to before when I was wide open, heroing all the time. So this is basically it. A lot of things have changed in a way that I feel like I have matured. I feel like I have stepped into a new era of my photography where I see things more pragmatically with a much more adult and mature eye. I have given up on romantic beliefs like I should be feeling special and worthwhile because of the tools I would use. And this is important. This is important because while I still do strive to take good pictures and do good photography, you see, I used the fact that vintage lenses really do make for charming images, especially shot wide open. And I use that as a crutch because looking back, a lot of my images are just pretty on the outside with nothing going on the inside. Basically, the lenses were making the images pretty. I wasn't making the images pretty because were I to shoot a trash bin with the sizest of sizes at f1.2, the most exotic of lenses, shooting a trash bin, that would make for a pretty picture for a split second. All that bokeh, the bokeh, yeah, yet another thing, the depth of field blur, yet another thing that kind of poofed away and became less romantic. Because shooting this 40mm f2.5 Sony G lens, it doesn't make a lot of background blur. But what it does make is basically dead-on, in-focus images all the time. And that's important because it allows me to concentrate on what I include or exclude. It allows me to concentrate on composition, on form, on light. I'm that kind of person that gets tunnel vision. When I used to shoot vintage lenses, I would focus on getting sharp and in-focus pictures so much that I lost track of basically all other things. So where was I when I remembered that bokeh is not all that? Sure, I still like a bit of background separation. Sure, I still like some blur, but it's not the end-all be-all. I'd much rather have an image with a lot of depth of field, with little blur, but with a good moment, a good story, with proper composition, with good geometry, with movement and dynamism. And it's yet another way. I feel like I've matured as a photographer, but also as a person, because I realized I need a bit of humility. I was looking down on other photographers just because they were using autofocus lenses. I saw them as lazy, and I'm ashamed of that right now. It was just basically out of an insufficiency of mine, where I wanted to feel special, but I had nothing special, but the fact that I had somewhat decent proficiency in manually focusing. And that's not all that. With enough practice, even a monkey can manual focus. Those of you that remember my attempt to switch to Fujifilm, I said much of these same things, that I would be using technology in my favor to try to get more and better pictures. But what I didn't know back then was how to do that. All I knew and all I tried was just to use other tools. But this workshop and getting feedback on my images each night and specific personal feedback on my own images meant that it was an excellent learning opportunity. I learned quite a lot about how and why things should be moving in your images, how to build movement and dynamism, how to use geometry, how to compose, what to shoot and what not to, what to include and what to exclude. I feel like now, together with the fact that I've realized that I need to use the best tools available for me, I have also been given a method. It was really important. This workshop meant a lot to me as a person because it made me realize that I don't need to be special, especially not at the expense of others, and especially not by demeaning others, even if I was doing it in my own mind, because it's not something that I publicly voiced. I did still think this, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should apologize, and I am. It's not something I'm proud of. I need to learn a bit of humility, and I think I have. Now I'm happy to be like all the other photographers using autofocus. I don't mind being just like all the others. And it's up to me to differentiate myself now with my work and not with my tools. It's quite a challenge. And I've got my work cut out for me, but I'm happy and eager and enthusiastic about it. And before I wrap things up, this really does mean there will likely be no more vintage lens reviews on the channel. I still might do one more. It's basically almost there. I have enough images for a Konica 100mm f2.8 review. I'm not sure I'm going to do it. I don't really feel like it right now, but it feels like a waste, all that work. I might do it, I might not. But save for that, I think it's safe to say there will be no more vintage lens reviews on the channel. I plan to do a lot more book reviews, where I share my opinions on photography books. I have quite a few that I've gathered, and I want to talk about them. I'm going to be leaving you with a few dozen images I've taken during this workshop, and I feel like they are some of the best images I ever made. I'd be really, really happy to hear your thoughts on the matter. If you stuck around until now, I'm really, really grateful for your time. Hope it was somewhat enjoyable or worthwhile. Please enjoy the images. Until next time, I have been Radu. This has been 1000 Words. Farewell.